We all know the real-life news that the incredibly talented young actor Gary James Fuller has had to undergo two surgeries recently following a very unfortunate accident. While we are all sending him our absolute best wishes for a speedy, safe, and complete recovery, the reality of daytime television dictates that the show must inevitably go on. The writers and producers are now faced with a very significant creative challenge regarding how to properly explain the sudden and prolonged absence of James from our television screens. They could simply take the easy route and send him off to a remote boarding school, a sudden summer camp, or an extended vacation with distant relatives. But it seems like the creative team might actually seize this unexpected real life opportunity to weave a narrative so profoundly dark, twisted, and thrilling that it will leave us all completely breathless and begging for more. What if this temporary hiatus is actually the perfect disguised catalyst for the most explosive and emotionally devastating storyline of the entire year? We have been watching the subtle dynamics shift for a while now, carefully analyzing every glance and every hushed conversation, but no one could have expected the sheer magnitude of the betrayal that might be brewing right under our very noses. If you ask me, the writers are meticulously setting the stage for James to experience the most profound, terrifying, and devastating shock of his entire young life. Imagine the heartbreaking scenario where an innocent child, perhaps simply looking for a lost toy in the attic or innocently exploring the hidden, dusty corners of his own home, stumbles upon a dark secret that completely shatters his reality and destroys his innocence forever. It's highly likely that James is about to cross a line of no return and discover that the man he has been looking up to, the man he has proudly and lovingly called his father, is nothing more than a highly dangerous, calculating impostor. For months, the audience has harbored deep-seated suspicions about this mysterious figure, analyzing his strange behavior and out-of-character moments, but the truth might be far more complex and horrifying than a simple, run-of-the-mill case of mistaken identity or corporate espionage. The speculation is currently running absolutely wild that the man parading around town, sleeping in their home, and acting as a pillar of the community is actually Cassius. For those keeping track of the twisted family tree, Cassius is the brother of the real Nathan and, consequently, the biological uncle to poor little James. The heavy psychological weight of this horrific realization would be absolutely crushing and traumatic for a young, impressionable boy. James would have to slowly process the terrifying reality that his true father, the real, heroic Nathan, is genuinely gone from this world, leaving behind a legacy that has been entirely hijacked and corrupted by a manipulative, cold-blooded usurper. This could mean that every warm hug, every stern word of fatherly advice, and every single moment of paternal affection James has received lately has been completely fabricated. A toxic, poisonous lie spun by a man with incredibly dark, hidden motives. The absolute betrayal of realizing that the face of your protector actually belongs to your greatest enemy is a psychological thriller element that daytime television rarely explores with such depth, and it would push the boundaries of what we expect from these characters. Instead of immediately running to Maxie with this world-shattering, terrifying information, it could be that James decides to dig a little deeper on his own. Kids in this town always seem to inherit a certain reckless bravery and an insatiable curiosity, and James is certainly no exception to that unspoken rule. We can vividly picture him secretly monitoring Cassius from the shadows, holding his breath as he listens through slightly open doors, and desperately trying to piece together a terrifying, adult puzzle that he barely understands. As he quietly and dangerously investigates the man who stole his father's face and life, he unearths something even more sinister and unbelievable. The dark rabbit hole of Cassius's grand deception does not just stop at identity theft and playing house. James begins to connect the terrifying dots regarding another mysterious, agonizing disappearance that has been haunting his family for months. It has been a lingering, painful question for a while now, but what if James discovers the horrifying, unvarnished truth about his beloved grandmother, Liesel? The dark whispers in the rumor mill strongly suggest that Cassius is secretly holding Liesel captive in a remote, undisclosed, and heavily fortified location, entirely cut off from the rest of the world and her loved ones. Cassius has somehow managed to keep this massive, explosive secret buried deep for months, meticulously covering his tracks, forging documents, and ensuring that absolutely no one in town even suspects his vile involvement in her sudden vanishing act. He is clearly a man who is willing to do absolutely anything, no matter how depraved or violent, to protect his fragile, stolen empire of lies. His ruthless, sociopathic nature means he views anyone who gets even slightly too close to the truth as a fatal liability that must be permanently neutralized. This brings us to the most terrifying, heart-stopping turning point of our speculative journey today. Imagine the sheer terror of the moment when Cassius, perhaps noticing a misplaced document or hearing a floorboard creak, suddenly realizes that his young, supposedly naive nephew knows entirely too much about his criminal enterprise. The innocent, childish curiosity of a little boy suddenly becomes the single greatest threat to a master manipulator's grand, evil design. When Cassius catches James snooping through his hidden files or eavesdropping on a burner phone call, the comforting mask of the loving father will instantly melt away. It will be replaced by the cold, dead, calculating stare of a true, unhinged villain who has been backed into a dangerous corner. Rather than taking the massive risk of letting James run crying back to Maxie to expose the entire elaborate operation to the police, Cassius will have to make a split second, desperate, and unforgivable decision. He simply cannot let the boy go free. A brand new, horrifying kidnapping plot will unfold right before our very eyes, with James vanishing into thin air without leaving a single, solitary trace behind for his frantic family to find. The sudden and completely inexplicable disappearance of James will absolutely send massive, paralyzing shockwaves through the entire town, tearing families apart and putting everyone on high alert. At first, the local authorities and even some well meaning family members might lean towards a much more mundane, less terrifying explanation to comfort themselves. They might logically assume that the boy, overwhelmed by some typical, everyday childhood angst, a poor grade at school, or a minor family argument, simply decided to pack a small bag and run away from home for a few days to blow off steam. But as the agonizing hours turn into sleepless days, and the days stretch out into a week with absolutely no word, no ransom note, and no sightings of him anywhere, the creeping, suffocating dread will inevitably set in. The silence from the missing boy will become deafening, and the initial, hopeful theories of a runaway child will quickly and violently crumble under the crushing weight of the terrifying unknown. This catastrophic, heartbreaking event will undoubtedly serve as the ultimate explosive catalyst to thrust Maxie right back into the very central spotlight of the show, where she truly belongs. We all know, without a shadow of a doubt, that there is absolutely nothing more fierce, dangerous, or unpredictable than a mother who has lost her precious child. Maxie will absolutely not sit idly by while the incompetent police file endless paperwork, hold press conferences, and wait for cold leads to magically warm up. She will completely bypass the authorities and launch herself into a desperate, frantic, and relentless one-woman search mission. Her deep, primal maternal instincts will scream at her that something is fundamentally, horribly wrong within the walls of her own home, and it's highly likely that she will be the very first person to sense the subtle hairline cracks in Cassius's carefully and obsessively constructed facade of the grieving, worried father. Maxie will slowly begin to notice his slight, unnatural hesitations when answering questions, his overeager, almost suffocating attempts to comfort her and keep her sedated, and the dark, sinister shadows hiding just behind his eyes when he thinks no one is looking. Driven by pure, unadulterated adrenaline, sleeplessness, and profound heartbreak, Maxie will transform into an unstoppable, terrifying force of nature. She will start obsessively retracing James's final known steps, tearing through his bedroom and his belongings to find any hidden notes, drawings, or subtle clues he might have desperately left behind before he was taken. She will become a woman entirely consumed by her obsession, and her relentless, dangerous pursuit of the hidden truth will slowly but surely lead her down the very same dark, treacherous path that her young son took. As she begins to aggressively unravel the tangled threads of Cassius's massive deception, the stakes for everyone involved will reach an all-time dizzying high. She will not just be looking for a lost, frightened boy anymore. She will be actively hunting down a vicious monster who has intimately infiltrated her home, slept in her bed, and completely stolen her family's sense of safety and reality. Meanwhile, far away from the searching eyes of the town, in the dark, damp, hidden location where Cassius is cruelly keeping his prisoners locked away from the sunlight, a truly remarkable and emotionally complex dynamic will begin to unfold. James will be violently thrown into a cold, unfamiliar, and terrifying room, crying and feeling completely alone in the world, only to discover through the gloom that he is not the only captive suffering in this hellhole. Out of the deep shadows of the cell will step Liesel, battered but entirely unbroken. The profound emotional impact of this unexpected reunion between a fierce grandmother and her terrified grandson, taking place in the absolute most horrific and hopeless of circumstances, will be incredibly powerful and moving to witness on screen. Instead of breaking down entirely and surrendering to despair, the shared, horrific trauma will instantly forge an unbreakable, unexpected, and formidable alliance between the two generations. Liesel, with her notoriously fierce, violently protective nature and her extensive, dark history of surviving impossible, deadly odds, will immediately and instinctively shift into high gear survival mode. She will do absolutely everything within her considerable power to physically and emotionally shield James from the ongoing psychological torment and physical threats of their shared captivity. But James will not just be a passive, weeping victim in this terrifying scenario. The innocent boy who was once carefree and sheltered will be violently forced to grow up in the blink of an eye, adapting to his harsh new reality. He will become the vital, shining ray of hope and the tether to humanity that Liesel so desperately needs to keep her own dark demons at bay. Together, they will start constantly whispering in the dark corners of their cell, pooling their limited knowledge of their captor, and meticulously, patiently plotting a highly daring and dangerous escape plan. James's small physical size, surprising agility, and cleverness, perfectly combined with Liesel's legendary cunning, medical knowledge, and ruthless, unyielding determination to survive, will make them a surprisingly formidable and dangerous team against their arrogant jailer. This incredibly tense, claustrophobic storyline serves a brilliant dual purpose for the show's production. On one strategic hand, it provides a highly dramatic, engaging, and perfectly logical on-screen explanation for the character's sudden absence, while Gary James Fuller takes the necessary, quiet time he needs to heal and recover in the real world. On the other, much more exciting hand, it perfectly sets up an explosive, high-stakes rescue mission that will completely redefine the social and emotional landscape of the entire town. It brilliantly elevates Cassius from being a mere sneaky imposter to becoming one of the most genuinely dangerous, calculating, and completely irredeemable villains the town has seen in many, many years. The agonizing suspense of waiting for Maxie to finally connect the final dots and kick down the door to their prison, or for James and Liesel to successfully outsmart their cruel jailer and break themselves out, will absolutely keep us all glued to the edge of our seats, analyzing every single frame of every episode. And we really have to take a moment to deeply think about the long-term, devastating psychological ramifications of this horrific ordeal on everyone involved. When James is eventually, thankfully rescued and finally makes his triumphant, tearful return to our screens in his mother's arms, he will absolutely not be the exact same innocent, wide-eyed little boy who vanished into the night. He will permanently carry the heavy, dark, and suffocating weight of the terrible secrets he uncovered and the profound trauma of his terrifying captivity. He will be a hardened survivor who has looked pure, unadulterated evil directly in the eye and miraculously lived to tell the tale. The young boy who eventually returns home will possess a new, hardened edge to his personality, carrying the very specific, dangerous knowledge that will ultimately and completely destroy the massive empire of lies that Cassius has so ruthlessly and carefully built over the past year. The eventual explosive fallout from this massive town-wide deception will shatter romantic relationships, severely test family loyalties, and leave deep, ugly scars that may never, ever truly fade away. Will Maxie ever be able to truly forgive herself for being so blind and letting such a dangerous, manipulative monster into their lives and near her precious children? Will Liesel, once she is free, seek a brutal, violent, and uncompromising revenge against the man who stole her freedom, mocked her intelligence, and deeply traumatized her beloved grandson? And, perhaps most importantly of all, what kind of dark, lingering legacy will this entire nightmare leave on young James's psyche as he slowly grows older in a complicated town where family ties are very often the most dangerous and deadly traps of all? The pieces are all rapidly moving on the board right now, guys, and the game is turning incredibly deadly. We will just have to keep closely watching the shadows, trusting nobody to see exactly who strikes next.